show, described as a liberal Zionist. And I think first and foremost, when I reflect on that time and that belief that I held of like, I am a liberal and also like Jews need Israel and whatever, because like that's what was instilled in me growing up, it almost feels like a waiting room of a belief system that you can only stay in as long as you don't think super hard about what any of it means.
Yes.
So what does it mean?
That's a perfect way of describing it. I think liberal Zionism, as someone who was also formerly a liberal Zionist, in America at least, I can only speak for myself and, all the Jews of the West. But liberalism and sort of progressivism and
You're
beliefs.
so stupid.
I am stupid. Was something that a good portion of Jews in America are quote unquote liberal, meaning things like being pro civil rights, again, not just for people of color, but also for gay people. Liberalism in general being big in cities, right? So Zionism was also a belief that a lot of us had, which is, Israel, the state for the Jews, being a net good thing. The connectivity between liberal and Zionist happens basically because you need a reason to believe in something that is inherently wrong. Like this is my feeling about it, but a liberal Zionist is essentially a shallow thinker when it comes to this one particular issue of Zionism. It's someone who only wants to know enough about what Zionism is in order to justify it in a liberal way. So it's using liberalism to justify inherently illiberal things. And I think that's, why the conflict, that contrast is so apparent. A liberal Zionist is someone who believes in all of the same leftward-leaning schlock that anyone else believes in, whether it's representation politics, identity politics, again, civil rights. But when it comes to Israel, there's an exceptionalism. There's something exceptional about it. It's not just that like people having liberty to be the person they are is a good thing, but that it is a inherently superior thing to the way that other people live in the East. And so liberal Zionists often will point out the fact that like in Israel, we have all of these liberal beliefs. And it's one thing to say, yes, these beliefs are good. It's another thing to say that these liberal beliefs supersede ethical or moral principles that you may believe in with any other case.
It is a belief in Israel as an ethno-state, and it's a Jewish supremacist notion. And in the explicitly American context, it's one that can fit into the idea that you should support the Democratic Party, where it's a notion of ethnic or religious supremacy that still can be reconciled with, calls for civil rights here domestically. And that contradiction is falling apart right now before our eyes.
I genuinely struggle to understand liberal Zionism because it's like, again, I think about like people I grew up around who are like, yeah, we hate Netanyahu, but Israel can function without the constant violence brought upon Palestinians by someone like Benjamin Netanyahu. But I'm like, when has that ever been the case?
It has never been the case.
Israel was founded, 1948, the Nakba, the forcible violent displacement of 750,000 Palestinians. Whenever I hear liberal Zionists talk about like, well, we need a liberal leader, Netanyahu is a far right. We need a more liberal person in charge of the Israeli government. But I'm like, the project of Israel is an illiberal project. I think I kind of, this is not in my script, but like I really run into problems with that logic. And even people who think that the project of Israel is one that's separate from Netanyahu. I see him as like a very authentic Zionist leader in that like all of Israel's dehumanization of Palestinians for the last 70 odd years have led to this exact moment.
If Benjamin Netanyahu was gone today, there is very little that would change. In fact, I would argue that outside of maybe his more belligerent actions of trying to stay in power by bombing a variety of different Middle Eastern countries, things would remain exactly the same. Benjamin Netanyahu has stayed in power in a parliamentary system in Israel that, again, is racially segregated, because despite what you'll hear about how Hamas is really the governing body in Gaza, and that the West Bank is autonomous in any way, it's not the case. The Gaza Strip is, even prior to October 7th, the borders of this small strip of land that's around 141 square miles were controlled by Israel land and sea. They would, over the years, repeatedly bomb the Gaza Strip to, quote, mow the lawn in order to make sure that any Palestinian resistance would be tamped down. They could shut off their electricity. They would, quote, keep Gazans on a diet because they could control the flow of food and water in and out, control their water sources, etc.
And this is all pre-October 7th.
All pre-October 7th, yes. And it basically was the Warsaw Ghetto, and now it is an open-air concentration camp, is what I would liken it to historically. And so that project and the attempt to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from the land and remove them from the Gaza Strip, which is on the water, it's beachfront property, as you'll hear from the Trump administration over and over again. It's important to Israel to try to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians so they can take it. That would all be there without Benjamin Netanyahu. And the problem, as you were both were saying, is the concept of Israel as an ethno-state, the concept of a state being defined by one's ethnicity or religion. And what we talk about on my show and what leftists will say is that the only solution here is a one democratic state, truly, from the river to the sea, where there is a United Nations, say, commission that comes in, oversees this so that it can reduce violence. And there are truth and reconciliation committees about the participants in this genocide. And you bring Palestinians back and integrate them into Israel racially and ethnically so that they have full and equal rights and that they too have a right to return. That is a left-wing, multicultural, truly even liberal vision of folks living amongst one another and learning from each other. And liberal Zionists don't believe in that. And that is where we talk about the contradiction.
Whew. Snaps.
I also think it's important to point out what exactly liberal Zionists do believe in. And it's actually, there's a lot of different levels. If you're talking about someone like Deborah Messing, they might be, I think it's pretty clear that they are ideological Zionists. They're Zionists first. The liberal part is just window dressing. For a lot of other liberal Zionists, or people who I label liberal Zionists, I think what that label to me means, at least for some of them, is they have a non-ideological and ignorance-based approach to talking about Israel and also dealing with it. It's like liberalism is almost therapeutic. For them, it's a deep need to still believe that they are on the right side and they are the good guys here. And I think some of them are doing whatever they can, whatever's possible in order to continue living in that ignorance.
I think it's so interesting talking about the ways in which liberal versus like sort of openly right-wing Zionists deal with the reality of like what has become of Zionism, which is obviously a genocide. When you look at the right, when you look at the MAGA movement, for example, you see them being like, yeah, we're going to flatten it. We're going to turn Gaza into a parking lot. We're going to build waterfront property. Whereas liberal Zionists will speak with a little bit of shame, like, oh, there, it's too much. There's too much human suffering, but also this is what needs to be done. Like, that's what I mean. And you're so right. It's window dressing. And that's what I mean when I say, like, there's not a lot of daylight in the policy differences that both of these groups are pushing for, which is why when you look at the Democratic Party, which is made up almost entirely of liberal Zionists, and the Republican Party, which is made up of right-wing Zionists, like, there's no major anti-Zionist party in the United States, which is also, largely because they're all bought out by AIPAC, but, that's another conversation. MAGA Zionists will say, they'll see the pictures of dead Palestinians and they'll be like, fuck them.
Right.
Whereas liberal Zionists, democratic Zionists will see the pictures and say, oh, well, all casualties of war are tragedies.
It's a commitment to being sad publicly and doing nothing.
And it's about a hierarchy